nobody really realized how close everything was. And in 1938 already, I felt we were so near war. And in 1939, of course, it happened. I do feel that during that time, there were many people, like Eden, who did realize the danger, but nobody seemed to be able to really shake the apathy of the majority of people. But the people didn't even begin to realize how the Chamberlain government was no match for these gangsters. And when eventually in 1938 I was here during the summer, Chamberlain came, and I stood outside the Regina Hotel where his delegation stayed and saw him arrive, and I saw him leaving, telling us all that this was peace in our time. To me, it was absolute madness to give in on anything, this regime. And when I went back to England and propounded these ideas, many people felt that this was no menace for us. It was probably a bulwark against communism.
Neville Chamberlain became Prime Minister in May 1937. A lonely and austere man in public, he had a fundamental contempt for those who were born outside the Anglo-Saxon race, particularly those of Jewish origin, and an absolute faith in the moral rectitude of the British Empire. From the start, he wanted a deal which would allow him to share power globally and to preserve that empire.
With this country, where we've said goodbye to increased taxation and further cuts, and on the contrary are able to begin the work of relief from...
Consolidating the British economy after the 1931 crash and dreaming about Teutonic unity like his father Joe, Chamberlain did not want to see all his hopes dashed by standing against Hitler. A deal with the dictators would have to be made.
Chamberlain regarded his accord with Hitler as being the fulfillment of his father's most cherished dream. Joseph Chamberlain, Neville's father, had tried for many years to achieve an alliance between Britain and Germany. And so when Neville Chamberlain signed an agreement at Munich, he very much saw it as the fulfillment of all of his father's fondest wishes in the area of European diplomacy. As Neville Chamberlain understood it, appeasement was not the diplomacy of capitulation, but a powerful and dramatic policy by which all of the outstanding problems of European diplomacy were to be settled in one dramatic and final agreement.
Both Joe Kennedy and Neville Chamberlain were like brothers when it came to their attitudes toward appeasement. They both came out of World War I with a real hatred toward war in general that I think was legitimate and genuine in both men. They also both had this business background. Chamberlain's a failed background, Joe Kennedy's splendidly successful, but it made them equate civilization with the economic structure of the world. And they had this ridiculous fear that war would end civilization as they knew it because it would disrupt the markets from one country to another. And they both came out of that business background, I think, also believing that a rational deal was possible with anyone as long as you could bargain, even including Hitler. And those things tied together two very different men who should have been on different sides of the issues just by temperament. Chamberlain, tall, stiff, cold. Kennedy, the opposite, this gregarious, open Irishman. But their attitudes toward war and their overbelief in business made them brothers as far as appeasement went.
Abyssinia, Spain, China. 3 wars, concessions to the dictators. Chamberlain's attitude to non-white territories was that they were only real estate to be traded as national interest dictated. The 1930s brought new refinements to the horror of war, with the fleshing of the maiden weapon of the bomber, as the cameras were quick to show. there was a plentiful supply of material for the eye of the camera. In Abyssinia, where Mussolini fixed the regime of Haile Selassie with bombs and gas, and in Spain, where the fixer's men could be found alongside German airmen perfecting the blitzkrieg and using Spanish fields as the training ground. On the wide screen, the camera showed what became of civilians in modern war, and the shivers down the spine did nothing to stiffen the backs of democratic governments who already feared that the bomber will always get through. The high-flying American aviator Charles Lindbergh, seeking refuge in Europe after the tragic kidnap of his son, helped this process by acting as a Nazi propaganda tool.
It's most unfortunate that Lindbergh, although he was a very skilled flyer himself, both in flying planes but in navigation, and had done many, many long flights to places that hadn't been flown to before, and was a first-class airman in that sense, was not a military airman. He had not, he had no particular range of knowledge about what could be expected of the Luftwaffe if war came in the fall of 1938. And without that knowledge, what he did was to kick up an absolute storm of fear, quite unnecessary fear. He told people that if war came, that within a matter of weeks, the Luftwaffe was so powerful that all the other air forces would have been destroyed, that bombs would be dropping all over England and cities would be blazing, which was absolute rot. Despite the quality of the Luftwaffe, which was much larger, to be sure, than the numbers of any other major nation, and did indeed have some very good air types. The fact was that it was not made for long-range heavy bombardment. They had virtually no four-engine planes, but in terms of the attacking of England, which was the main thing that Chamberlain feared, there was no chance of it at that time, no reason to fear it. And Lindbergh completely misjudged the military air situation, and did that with the aid of these speeches and meetings, in which he put great fear into many politicians of high level of power, so that I think his influence on a considered judgment of the situation in 1938 was very poor.
A war today is fundamentally different from all the wars of the past, inasmuch as its first and its most numerous victims would not be the professional fighters, but the civilian population, the workman, the clerk, the housewife, and most horrible of all, the children.